Hello again, everyone. It's your old pal Guardian Enzo here, coming to you with a nice Glencairn glass of some dusty Wild Turkey bourbon, and just as comfortable as having a chat with old friends, which is exactly what's happening tonight. Actually, I'm joined for the first time on the LiA channel. We have a special guest, and that's it's Samu from the RC legend, the RC writer emeritus, who has always been someone whose tastes in anime and manga have overlapped with mine quite a lot. He also has the distinction of being the only RC writer to visit me in Japan, and someone I have had a great online relationship with for years, someone I consider a friend, and it's always great to catch up. We just got to chatting a while ago and decided it would be great to get together and talk about stuff on tape. So here we are. So Samu, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I feel like we catch up a lot behind the scenes, but yeah, I wanted to join you here on your YouTube and just chat about all the stuff that we love together.
Yeah, if those of you with long memories may remember that among the many RC podcasts we did a solo podcast there together, just the two of us, on the theme of Hunter x Hunter. And we went for probably a good 2 hours talking about Hunter x Hunter, which should tell you how much the two of us love that series. And I think it's been on hiatus probably since that podcast. So or close to it. If I'm not mistaken, this is the longest hiatus in the history of the series. Is it not?
Yeah, that's right. I think it passed it only a few months ago, but it's not a positive sign, but
No, it's
we
not.
can only hold out hope that one day.
Yeah, as someone who suffers from chronic back pain, I'm highly sympathetic to what Togashi is going through, and I can't even imagine what it's like. We've already done a Hunter x Hunter podcast, and I don't want to rehash that, but just say I would love it if he would decide to just become the scriptwriter and work with a full-time artist, because I just want more Hunter x Hunter, no matter how we get it. But I want to start off by asking you about you took quite a hiatus from anime, did you not?
Yeah, so when I retired from RC, and I believe it was winter 2017, which is 5 years ago now, I pretty much stopped watching anime altogether. And typically what I do is, and I usually message you once a year saying, I'm going to watch some anime now. What should I watch? And I catch up and I watch maybe half a dozen shows from the past year that I think I would like, or that I've seen you blogging or on RC that have been blogged. And yeah,
but never you've never taken a hiatus from manga, though, have you?
A little bit. When Bleach ended, which I also blogged on RC, it kind of felt like a good stopping point. But quickly after, I just kept reading manga and kept up with a lot of new shows and new manga, and yeah.
And what have you seen anime wise in the last year or two that's really impressed you?
Well, my favorite from 2021 is Heike Monogatari, which I know is also your favorite. But I think I did mention to you when I watched it that I just genuinely thought it was very moving and seriously beautiful in all the moments that it tries to be profound. And I didn't read your post until after I'd fully watched it, so
lucky you.
It was yeah, I mean, while I was sitting there watching all the episodes, loving it, I thought that you really did have the opposite experience. Maybe in the beginning you were a little bit hopeful, but yeah, I suppose it's just a different perspective of what you know, what you don't, and how it worked. But I also watched another one that isn't in your top 10, which was probably my second favorite of the year, would be Odd Taxi. I really, really love that as well.
Yeah, that was in my second 10. That came in number 13 for me for the year. That was a really good show. I didn't quite embrace it as much as some folks did, but I do think its success is a good thing for anime because it's such a thoroughly atypical anime, and the more atypical anime we get in the production committee age, I think the better it is. And it's
For sure.
definitely it's a weird anime with a really interesting marketing program. Like they had Twitter accounts and stuff going like 6 months before the show aired. That stuff that they could reference back to when it was. I mean, it was really, it was a thing of beauty the way that whole series was put together. It's going to be interesting. There is a movie coming up, as you probably know, and my thinking was that there would
Hmm.
probably be another season because the first one did quite well on video. But how they would reconcile the whole animal thing with now what we now know, I'm not sure how they would do that going forward. Um, but if you haven't seen Odd Taxi, folks, I highly recommend it. It's not like any other anime you've seen recently. I think that's probably a pretty safe bet. Let's so the meat of this conversation, we'll talk about anime, but I think the meat of this conversation is going to be manga, because you and I both really love manga. You and I both really love shonen manga, but you have a knowledge of the goings on of Shonen Jump that puts mine to shame. So I think you're a good resource to talk about some of the stuff that's currently going on in Shonen Jump. The first thing, though, I want to get your feedback on. I did a couple videos back. I did a little exposure, a little exploration of the Kimetsu phenomenon. But the point I wanted to get your input on is what the next big series is going to be. And I threw out two major candidates there, which were Chainsaw Man and Spy Family. And I was wondering, do you think one of those two shows will be a big hit on the level of at least Tokyo Revengers? And if so, which one? And if not, what else do you think has a chance to do that?
I'd say yeah, those are the two series that I would place my bets on. I think Spy X Family might do better in Japan versus I can see Chainsaw Man doing well with Western audiences, doing it well internationally, trending on Twitter and reaction videos on YouTube to certain episodes or moments, especially if it does get the good MAPPA treatment as opposed to not being top of their priority, which I don't think will be the case. I think they are going to put their staff through everything that they put them through to make it their top priority in 2022. So I would say Chainsaw Man is probably the best bet. And I'd say Spikes. Well, I only recently learned it's actually Spy Family. Similar to Hunter x Hunter, I've been calling it Spy Family as well.
Me too.
So yeah, I would say a third series coming in 2022 that could, maybe not on the same level, but it could gain a good sizable following, could be Hell's Paradise, Jigokuraku.
Oh, really?
Which is also by MAPPA. It's a Jump Plus series that finished, I believe, last year, and the author is now serialized in Jump itself. I've read the whole manga and I think it has flaws, but I think it has its highs as well. And I can see if it's got a good anime adaptation that it could appeal to a lot of people who want something maybe similar to Chainsaw Man, which is shonen but pushes the envelope a bit. And yeah, I can see that being, if that's a third choice, that would be mine.
I have actually heard some good things about that series. What is the mangaka? What is their Jump series now? What is their weekly Jump series? You said
The
he's
author
in
is,
weekly Jump now?
he is, so it's Yuji Kaku is the author, and the new series is Ayashimon, which at the moment only has, I believe, 6 or 7 chapters, so it really is new. But I quite like it so far, and I think they're probably putting him there as a safe. Well, no one's really safe in Jump, which I'm sure we'll touch upon, but
Yeah.
as safe as someone can be just going in at a pretty competitive time in the magazine. And yeah, with his previous series now getting an anime in 2022, it's a good time. If you want to either read or watch Hell's Paradise or jump onto his new series, Ayashimon, I'd recommend them both.
Well, at this point with Hell's Paradise, I would imagine I'll probably just end up waiting and watching the anime rather than going to the manga. But especially since it's finished, one presumes that we'll get a more or less complete telling with the author's intended ending. So no reason to avoid the anime in that instance. Let's all right. So let me. I'm looking at the current rundown, more or less current rundown of what's in Weekly Jump. So let me tell you what I'm following, and see if you have any specific thoughts. I mean, obviously, One Piece remains the average. It tops the rankings. It lost its short term crown in terms of sales dominance, but it remains the long term.
Yeah.
It remains the long term titan. When do you think One Piece will finally end? Do you have a theory on that?
Well, I mean, there's the 5 years that Oda's talked about, which I feel like he's said 5 years for 2 years now. Um, and then there's also, I think, a recent interview with the voice actress of Luffy, who said that she thinks she'll be done in 7 or 8 years, I believe,
Okay.
which would be an extra year than the manga. So I think roughly 5, 6 years is a good bet. But I would definitely say this decade it's going to end. Even story-wise, I can see it wrapping up within that time.
That will be a monumental moment when that finally happens. Of course,
Well,
academia still going strong. We're led to believe that he's more or less in the extended final act. Uh, People may not realize that as big as Jujutsu Kaisen and especially Kimetsu have become, I think internationally, I think Boku no Hero Academia is still bigger than either one of those in terms of at least in terms of manga sales. I know it is. The
yeah, definitely
Kimetsu,
in the US.
yeah, in the U.S. for sure. All right, so some current series that I'm following. Blue Box. What are your thoughts on Blue Box?
Well, Blue Box is what's overall my favorite Weekly Shonen Jump title of 2020. So that's a good place to start. I I think it's just great. I think it's probably the best modern romance series within Jump. Not that they've had a lot of competition.
I was going to say.
Um, Typically, they just fall into the realm of rom-com with a side of ecchi. But this one genuinely feels like something refreshing. Maybe something more in the line of Weekly Shonen Magazine, which makes sense because that's where the author came from. But
Oh,
that's a good thing because
it's a she, right? The author of that is a woman, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, she originally, I forget, I think she did one series or she did two in a mini series, but yeah, she was originally serialized in Weekly
Okay.
Shonen Magazine,
It has a bit of an
which like
Adachi feel to it to me. That series, Blue Box, just a bit of a Mitsuru Adachi feel to it.
I mean like it's nice that instead of being a rom-com, it's essentially a like rom sports, which is a
Right.
nice um it gives itself a change of pace and a different focus than um what we see with typical romance series from Jump.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the odd ducks in Jump in a good way. I also think it's doing quite well in terms of the volume sales, doing quite well in terms of the weekly rankings. So evidence is this will probably get an anime at some point. Wouldn't you speculate?
Oh, 100%. If it's not already been discussed behind the scenes, it's definitely going to happen. I mean, yeah, I believe within the latest volume within a month sold over 100K, and which makes it roughly the seventh best selling in the magazine already, and that's with
Mm.
3 volumes, 2 volumes. Um, and it also is in the top 5 last year of highest table of content rankings. So
That's good.
it's doing everything a new series should and can do.
Now let's talk about another one which I'm quite interested in, which is the Elusive Samurai, which is by the
Mm.
same mangaka as Assassination Classroom, of course. Which
Mm.
no, the interesting thing to me about the Elusive Samurai, which is another one which I think is a lock to get an anime probably, is that it's quite popular in Japan. It sells about on the same level as Blue Box, and it seems to rank about in the same in the table of contents. But the overall opinion of it in English fandom seems to be quite low. What are your thoughts on Elusive Samurai and its future?
Um, my own personal, well, I like it. I've never loved anything that it's done yet, but I think that basically just comes down to the signature style of the mangaka, which I also found a bit jarring in Assassination Classroom. He likes to do, like, even in this series, which is historical, he likes a lot of modern references and
He does, yeah, yeah.
jumping and just strange comedy, which is kind of bizarre sometimes, but usually entertaining. So I've enjoyed Elusive Samurai. I'm kind of waiting for it to win me over completely. There have been moments here and there that I've enjoyed it when it does take itself quite seriously, but then it's also nice. It's got a nice cast. It's got an interesting story that it's going to tell, because it is based on a real person that did exist in the time.
Yep.
And even if it counts as spoiling, I did look at that individual's Wikipedia page, and it looks like if
Let's be careful.
Really
Let's be careful
here.
here.
It looks like it could go on for a long time if really intended to. So it'd be very interesting to see where the story would go. But yeah, I think it has its own way of telling the story, which maybe is a bit jarring to some people, and maybe I'm one of those people as well.
I found that to be more true with Assassination Classroom than I do with Elusive Samurai, but I do know exactly what you're talking about. I wonder too, it seems to me that S-Class was more popular in Japan than it was in the West too. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Assassination Classroom, I believe the first or second volume almost sold 1 million immediately, which is just unheard of. And I think the reason why it worked is maybe on average people in Japan get the sense of humor more, and it appeals to them more than internationally. But I think Assassination Classroom was a story that catered exactly to the demographic that it was
middle schoolers
written for. Yes, and middle schoolers just wanting to, kill their teacher. Like,
yeah.
I think
middle schoolers just wanted to kill their teacher, but he was also kind of cool.
He was kind of cool, and he was nice in the end. I think that ticked more boxes to have mainstream popularity, but I don't know if Elusive Samurai ever will have necessarily.
No, I don't think it will ever match Assassination Classroom in popularity, but I think it's certainly doing well enough in Japan to get an anime, I would say, almost definitely at some point. It and Blue Box are both right around the same age, if I'm not mistaken. So you would think anime would come at some roughly the same time. They seem to be about on that Black Clover World Trigger level of popularity, not like super duper popular, but popular enough to get long-running anime with modest budgets. Kind of, that's where I see them going.
Yeah, I think if they don't get announced by the end of this year, then we'll know that they're getting an anime by next year at least. Maybe just to build up the chapter count. But they're shoo-ins, absolutely.
Now I want to talk about two more specifically. One of them I know is one you think has some long-term sleeper potential, and I don't know this series, but I know you're a big believer, and that's Sakamoto Days. Tell us a little bit about Sakamoto Days.
Oh, Sakamoto Days is by a new author. It's I think it's a little bit older than Elusive Samurai. It came out at the beginning of 2021, and it's about a retired assassin who gives up his title to marry his sweetheart, and they own a convenience store together. And it jumps forward 5 years later after he retires, and he has a family and he has a normal life, but then people from this group of assassins return to his life, and he has to maybe take up this mantle. And it was just, when I started reading it weekly, it was just one of my favorites, and it's remained so until now. I would say a comparison, it's kind of similar in vibe to Gintama, except if you replace the heavy referential gags and comedy with endearing, sweet family dynamic moments and amp up the action. It's got that nice balance, which I think, would do well as well.
So you think that one has big potential commercial appeal? Is what I'm hearing?
Oh, this is my prediction. If it happens in 2023, 2024, when it eventually does get anime, and it goes right to the top of the yearly Oricon, I'm going to claim that I predict it first, because I do think it genuinely, as one of the series that isn't yet announced as an anime, I think when it does happen, there are so many quote-unquote moments within the series that could break the internet if adapted well, if done well. And I think it's so, the cast is so charming, mixed with this like really well choreographed action. I think it just appeals to just about everyone. And I think you would actually really enjoy it if it does get an anime and you do blog it. That's my prediction for now.
I may give the manga a shot before we get to that point, actually. But all right, so one more I want to talk about, because it had an anime adaptation announced fairly recently, and I'm not personally familiar with it other than knowing it exists, is Ayakashi Triangle, which is an interesting one in that, like Elusive Samurai, it seems to get a lot of bad reviews from the English-speaking fandom. Now, I have been told that some people have a theory that the reason that it gets bad reviews from people is that they're upset because the mangaka Yabuki Kentaro chose to do this rather than continue drawing To Love Ru. I don't know if there's any truth to that. For those that don't know him, in addition to being the art side of that, he was also the art and story for Black Cat. That was his long-running shonen manga that got an anime a while ago. Do you read Ayakashi Triangle? Do you have any thoughts on that series, either on its quality or its potential commercially?
I do read it, unfortunately, just because I'm a completionist and I like to keep up with the whole magazine. It's not for me. I'm not the target demographic. It's an ecchi. There's nothing. What you think it is exactly what it is. It's this ecchi gender bender with a little bit of exorcism. There's maybe one or two moments that I thought were genuinely quite nice, but otherwise, it's not for me. But also, I have seen on the opposite side, I have seen people complaining, people who do like their ecchi series, and do like the author, they think it doesn't go quite far enough in that direction, whereas for me it already goes far enough. So it's kind of a weird balance of, for people who don't like it, it does too much, and for people who want something that, tickles that part of what they want, it might not even do that for you.
That is and interesting that you mentioned that, because I wonder if that might be a problem for Sasaki to Miyano, which is, of course, not a weekly Shonen Jump series, but for those who don't know that one, that has an anime coming up in this month, premiering, which is a story about a high schooler, a boy who's a covert BL fan, and one of his senpai finds out, and it just so happens that this senpai is interested in him. Now, he's not interested in literally living out BL, as far as he knows. He's just interested in reading about it. So I wonder, what I think about with Sasaki to Miyano, which I've read a fair number of chapters of, I like it. I do think Sasaki is a bit of a creepy guy, but I like the series, but I wonder if it will be too BL for non-BL fans and not BL enough for BL fans. What do you think?
I've not read it, so I don't know personally, but from seeing reactions from it, I think it does lean more to catering to BL fans, even if initially it doesn't, dip its toe fully into going there. But it seems to be more a series where if you think you're going to like it, I think it will be for you. But it is also nice if we do get a series now and again in that demographic, which broadens up and allows more people to get into it.
I agree with that,
I don't know if it necessarily will be this series, but there are a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's nice to have a more or less serious male high school romance that doesn't totally rely on genre tropes, which I think is true of this one. The only problem I have, and you may agree or disagree when you see it if you watch the anime, but I do find that the older of the two main characters is a bit of a creepy guy. But that's just
Mm.
my personal opinion. Not everybody agrees with me on that. Let's talk
I mean,
about one more. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I mean it's a pretty common trope within
It
the
is,
genre,
yeah. It is.
sadly.
It is.
Um,
Sadly.
I think the only series I've not actually watched it or read it, but I think given that probably um, appealed to more people than just the core demographic when that came out as well. So if
Yeah.
if it can give like as much as that managed to do it, it might turn out better. Who knows?
I liked Given. My problem with Given ultimately was it was supposedly a music themed romance, and it didn't end up having that much music or romance in it, which kind of left me feeling a little bit like it underachieved. But I know that the anime, even factoring in the movie, which I have not actually seen yet, didn't tell the full story of the manga. So I'm sure that it does do a more complete storytelling job as it goes. Okay, let's talk about one more manga, which I hope will become an anime soon. Which I think you started reading at some point, possibly because I kept hyping it, and that's Boku Yaba. Uh, do
Mm.
you read Boku Yaba? I think you do read Boku Yaba, don't you?
I'm not caught up, but I've read like a volume or two worth of it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that potentially getting an anime? It's not a Shonen Jump series, but it's a bi-weekly, so I think that's the best rom-com in manga currently. With apologies to Blue Box, I think that's the best. I think that's the best manga. I think that's the best romance in manga, which you would never have expected coming from the author of Mitsudumoe. But I enjoyed Mitsudumoe as a screwball comedy. I thought it was very funny, but I think this is a much more substantial work in every respect.
I mean, yeah, it sells decently well, and it seems to be popular among people who do read it. I think surely it will get an anime eventually. Maybe up until now it's more of a case of building up material, but it sounds like from what you said that they've kind of reached that point. Even if they just want to do a one core adaptation, they can do that now.
Well, they get 6 volume is coming out this week actually, so they're at the point I think probably where you could see in an announcement. It would have to be probably one core, but I hope it happens. It did win the poll at the last Anime Japan for what anime the attendees wanted to see, what manga they wanted to see animated after finishing third last year. So I do think it has a lot of really. It may not be as popular as some of our shonen titles, but I think what it has in terms of a fan base is quite dedicated. And I think this one has a lot of upside. I think it could be the next big rom com. I really do. Rom com as a genre is sadly underrepresented in anime these days. I think you'd agree. It's
Mm.
not underrepresented in manga, but it's one of those things where we used to see nonstop adaptations of rom coms, and nowadays they rarely seem to get adapted, or they get live actions. Or, but on that subject, actually, I don't know if you're a fan of. You're something of a Rumiko fan, aren't you? Rumiko Takahashi. Um,
Um, yeah, I wouldn't say I haven't read or watched a lot of her works, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
so, what do you think about Urusei Yatsura getting a four-core reboot on Noitamina, no less? What have you heard that news? And if so, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of came from nowhere, um, and all the different every when you describe what it is, the four core Noitamina, the fact that it's getting this remake, it just seems just bizarre. I don't, it came from nowhere. But I'm curious to see what they do with it. If it's going to be 4 core, presumably they're going to try and give it a complete adaptation, or at least abridge some parts of it. And yeah, from the one key visual I think we got so far, it looks quite nice. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
I was stunned when I heard about this. Honestly, of all the series you would think would get rebooted, that isn't necessarily the first one that comes to mind.
I know.
Especially Noitamina, especially 4 cores. I mean that's kind of shocking actually. It's this is really old school. I mean the anime was airing in the 80s. I mean this is really old school. I would have expected Touch to get a reboot sooner, frankly, especially with Mix still out there, still in syndication and still selling very well. Incidentally, Mix, a series I suspect will probably get a second season when there's enough material for it. But anyway, so speaking of reboots, let's segue then into another. We don't know if it's going to be a reboot yet. I know you don't read and have not watched Rurouni Kenshin, but the news that there was going to be some sort of new Rurouni Kenshin anime project. It may be a reboot a la Brotherhood. It may be picking up with his sequel series only. It may be, God forbid, something original. The reason, of course, now Ruroken is one of the most legendary, one of the most popular Weekly Shonen Jump series, indeed one of the most popular manga of all time. Something like 70 or 80 million volume sales. All of the live action films have done extremely well at the box office. Had 3 seasons of anime, although the 3rd season was filler. It had multiple OVAs. So, animated movie. So, this is a big deal. But of course, it getting a reboot or some sort of sequel, getting some kind of new anime now is controversial because, of course, Watsuki Nobuhiro, the mangaka, was arrested for possession of child pornography a few years ago. And I briefly discussed this on the Notaku podcast a while back, but I did want to get, as someone who is a serious manga fan, I wanted to get your thoughts on the separation of the art and the artist, and where do you come down in this question, whether this should be happening, how we should. I'm not asking you to give us moral guidance, just what are your own kind of instinctive, visceral reactions to this news?
Well, as you said, I've not read Rurouni Kenshin. I've not watched any of its adaptations, so I don't have any personal attachment to it in the same way you do, or that a lot of people do, in seeing the new announcement. So to me, knowing what I know, I'm not necessarily inclined to jump into the series anytime soon, especially when there are other series by authors that I do like. But it's a tricky one as well, because a similar case is what happened with ActAge from Weekly Shonen Jump, I believe maybe a year and a half ago now, which at the time ActAge legitimately was, I think, the best series in the magazine, and it was right on the cusp of that length where it was about to get an anime adaptation. It was very popular, sold well, and it was a great series. And then, similar case happened with the writer there, not the artist.
Right.
And yeah, it kind of tarnished it, but at the same time, I can't suddenly say that I hate the series when for the longest time it was my favorite to read every week. So I don't know if something like that happened with ActAge and it got a continuation or an anime, I probably would read or watch it, but I would be careful on how I supported it or endorsed it in certain ways. Yeah, I think for me, I suppose I can separate the artist from the art a little bit, but it's more just a case-to-case basis, and there are definitely levels to which authors of manga or even just novels, or maybe a director of films that you like, there are different shades to what a person
Right.
can do. that I
Well,
think
yeah,
really just comes down to you.
yeah. It's an interesting example that you raised because I had forgotten it to an extent, but I think that was almost like a Chainsaw Man Spy Family thing, where that one was in a position where it might have been about to really take off, like explode. So that was a pretty
Yeah,
big deal. I whether that's a distinction or not, I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that there is a something of a distinction in what these two men were arrested for. In that, with the Act Age incident, there were victims, directly victims of that.
yeah,
And so, whether you'd say there are victims in both cases, I certainly respect that argument, but maybe in some eyes, at least, you could say there was a difference between owning a piece of something that's pornographic and then actually molesting someone in a train station, which is basically what the Act Age writer was arrested for.
mm,
Um, if you go, people talk about examples of this. I mean, Wagner is one you hear people talk about all the time. Who I'm sure you know Stephen Fry, the English writer and actor
yeah,
comedian, and someone I admire quite 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 severely. I think Stephen Fry is a modern genius, but he talks about Wagner a lot because he loves music and he loves Wagner's music. And yet Wagner was someone who was a Nazi before it was cool, basically. I mean, he was someone, it wasn't just that the Nazis appropriated his music, he was a sympathizer. So he wrestles with this because Stephen Fry, many people don't know this, Stephen Fry is Jewish, in fact.
mm,
And so he, in addition to being a liberally minded person who's not a racist, who would be uncomfortable with Wagner anyway, he has his own personal side to it in that he lost much of his family in the Holocaust. So, so Wagner didn't actually go out and he wasn't a member of the Nazi party in the sense that he wasn't involved in decision making and he wasn't fighting and he wasn't working in camps or anything horrible like that. Nevertheless, his music was the theme music of the Nazi regime, basically, of the Third Reich, and he was cool with that. And so, for someone like Fry, that's a difficult thing for him. It's obviously a much more dramatic example than the stuff we're talking about, but I do think the overall principle, there is some kind of commonality there when we're talking about separating the art from the artist. And as I said, I discussed this in Nutaku a while back with Setsuken, and it's not something I think there are easy answers to this. I think everybody has to make their own decision about it, but what I would say is what I see a lot of is people getting disrespected for whatever their decision is, and I see that on both sides. And that's where I struggle with it a little bit. Is I just think I think you do have to respect that people that as an audience can make up their own mind about this, and they don't deserve to be raked over the coals for doing that.
yeah. No, I
Uh,
agree. It's up to someone. It's every one person's decision on whether they want to watch or experience the whatever a certain author puts out, and where they draw the line and what topics. Like you mentioned, Stephen Fry. That in particular is close to him. Like for me, if I know an author is explicitly like homophobic, that
mm,
hits close home to me. Whereas for other people, it might not necessarily be the case. If someone, yeah, there's so many options where there's so many things that someone can do that can tick off a lot of different people. So it's up to you really. And all I'll say is, I think when it does come out, when this new adaptation, whether it's a remake or a continuation, I think it's going to be a continued discussion that's going to happen probably with every week that an episode comes
yeah,
out.
it will,
So
and
it's probably not.
especially for me as someone who was a long time diehard fan of Kenshin, which was really the first shonen. It was my first shonen, really. And as someone who has been desperate for the Jinshu arc, which is the last major arc of the original manga, which is truly fantastic, never got an anime adaptation. Fans of the manga have been desperate for literally for decades now for that to happen. If that were to finally happen now, it would be so hard not to be happy about it. You know, it would be a really difficult thing. As someone who would potentially be blogging this series, whatever it turns out to be, this is a special concern for me, because you talk about watching, if new Act Age came out, you know, watch it or read it, but be careful about supporting it. Well, that's something I really have to be conscious of as a writer, because if I'm blogging this series, I'm in effect tacitly I'm supporting it. So that's something I think about that with Attack on Titan too, actually, and I certainly don't want to go down that rabbit hole again. But I think about what I'm supporting by blogging Attack on Titan, even if I'm critical of it, and it gives me pause. Even though we have an author there who has not been convicted of anything criminal or even accused of anything criminal, as far as I know, some ideas that are being espoused there are kind of on that hard edge for me. But as I said, that's a rabbit hole we don't necessarily want to go down again. All right, so let's change the subject, and I want to slowly start reeling this in here, because you and I could talk for hours, and indeed we have in the past. But I want to slowly start reeling in, and I want to talk about: are there other manga out there which you think will or should get adaptations that you would want to make the viewers and listeners aware of? Anything specifically?
Yeah, I've got there's probably three in the top of my head. I've mentioned Sakamoto Days already. My prediction is when that comes out, it will explode, and it will be one of the pillars of the magazine, as well as one of the best-selling. I've got two other ones which are not Weekly Shonen Jump, so they are both shonen though, so it's not really stretching too far demographically. But the other one is from Jump Plus, called Kaijuu No. 8.
Yes.
It's not I do read it weekly. I don't love it, and I get the appeal. It's not really for me, but I can see that objectively it's doing very, very well in Japan already from Volume 1.
Very well.
And I think it'd be shocking if it didn't translate in the exact same way when it eventually does get animated. I think because it is also a bi-weekly, like a regular schedule, it might take longer for it to get enough material to get adapted. So that might be a couple of years down the line, but that's one that I think when it does come, that will definitely receive a boom. And I think another one will be, I think it's Sousou no Frieren, or Frieren Beyond Journey's End.
Oh yes. That will get an anime. I think we can agree that's almost definite. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, and I think, do you read it?
You know, I haven't read it, and it's on my list of, like, I need to get to this because it wins all these major awards, Manga Taisho, and it's always ranked. Everyone says it's fantastic. It's on my list. I got to read this, and I somehow just haven't made time to read it yet.
I think the thing that's quite deceptive about it is, if you saw the cover, you might think it falls into the group of every other isekai fantasy.
Yes, but I know it's not.
Anime.
I know it's not.
It's a proper fantasy series, and from chapter 1, it like really hits emotionally in a way that almost none of those series ever do. It's a really nice story about an elf who lives far longer than her human companions, and yeah, it's set after all the battle for saving the world by defeating the big evil bad guy. So it really, I wouldn't maybe not go as far to say it's subversive, but it feels really refreshing within the genre it's in. And that's another one that has been popular as a manga. And yeah, I think when it eventually does get animated, that'll be another one to go.
Yeah, I think that has the potential to be pretty big. Do you read Witch Hat Atelier, by the way?
I don't, but it is also one on my list. But I know it's monthly, isn't it? It's not a super regular
It is monthly, I think, but I mentioned it because I hadn't just popped into my head because I know it's getting an anime probably next year as well. So, and I
Oh,
know some
nice.
people who are seriously excited. All right, I'm going to ask you a kind of a sign off question here, but just to give you a chance to think about it, I'll answer it first. It's one I've already answered various times in these videos before, but I'll answer it with a new answer that I haven't used. If there was one manga which you know won't, or you're almost sure won't get an anime adaptation, but you think really should, what would it be? And today, I've given many answers. Today, I'll answer with Yugami-kun Niwa Tomodachi ga Inai, which I think is, it ran from about 2012 to 2019. A fairly popular manga, 16 volumes, sold pretty well, not like hugely, but I think just a really non-box put in manga. It's not a romantic comedy. It's not really a romance. It's not, but it is a comedy. But it does have possible romance. It's just a really, really interesting kind of deconstruction of human psychology using the high school model as sort of as the canvas on which to paint. And it comes off as a relatively simple, straightforward series, but the more you get into it, it's really deep. And I think it's also quite telegenic and would have made a wonderful anime. And I'm fairly certain it will never happen now, but it certainly should have. So that would be my pick. Do you have an answer to that one? What would you say?
Yeah, I have one that comes to mind immediately, which is Ooku, The Inner Chambers, by Fumi Yoshinaga, I think most people would know her from doing Antique Bakery.
Mm.
So Ooku, The Inner Chambers, is a historical, alternative history retelling of the entire Tokugawa shogunate. And one single thing that changes is there is a plague that happens which only affects the male population, which kills off majority of the men in society, and Japan as a whole shifts to a matriarchal way of running, which affects the shogun itself. So you have every shogun, I believe, from the third one onwards, is a woman, and you see the story of each of them throughout the entire the history of that family, and it's just a fantastic. I mean, it's definitely a feminist series, but the thing that makes it so excellent as well is it shows not just how these women who come into power and have to take on these positions that men had up until then, but it shows what happens to the surviving men of this world as well, and how they essentially have to take on roles and how they function in the society. And you get a really good sense from both perspectives just how this one switch affects every single person. And I think it's just fantastic.
No,
One that
I've heard of
I'll
I've heard of
definitely
this one actually, yeah, but I haven't read it. But I've heard of it. Now it's definitely joining my list. It sounds really intriguing. But like you said, I think it just ended too, didn't it? Not that long ago, probably. Maybe a year
Yeah, and I
ago, two
think
years.
yeah, a year ago in Japan. I'm still waiting for the final volume to get translated in English. But
Okay.
yeah, I would recommend it to just everyone. It's so great.
Okay, well that's a good tip. And let's just talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit before we sign off about. I mean, next year. I know you haven't been watching a lot of anime in the last couple of years, but next year there is a lot of interesting stuff out there. I mean, yeah, Witch Hat, Chainsaw Man, uh, Spy Family, two soccer series, Blue Lock and Aoashi, which won't be huge hits, although Blue Lock could potentially be a huge hit. I actually think Aoashi is the better series, but Blue Lock could potentially be a hit. But also,
Hmm.
sequel-wise, it's the most interesting sequel year I think we've seen in a long time. You've got Mob Psycho third season coming out. You've got Vinland Saga second season, theoretically Vinland Saga second season coming out. Made in Abyss second season, Golden Kamui fourth season. So these are some big time sequels coming in next year. Any sequels in particular that you would have highlighted as circled on your calendar that you're really looking forward to?
I mean, my obvious answer is the Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War. That's also coming out in fall 2022. So, yeah, that's one that I blogged on RC, the manga, the final arc. And I just know if it gets the adaptation that a lot of modern shonen series have gotten, it could really be a nice boost for the series. So that's the sequel that comes to mind for me next year.
All right, that's good. I have to say I never could get into Bleach, but I tried. I tried.
That's fair.
So, do you know what studio's doing? Do you know what studio's doing it?
It's Studio Pierrot again.
Oh, well.
They don't have the best track record, but they did a good job with Bleach back in the day, excusing filler. And the production timeline for this has been extended because of COVID, obviously, but they've had a fair amount of time. So I hope they put in the effort and it really pays off, because I think it could.
Well, Pierrot takes a lot of heat, but if people followed my top 10 lists on LiA, they were the dominant studio in my top 10 list for a 3 or 4 year period, because even if the adaptations they didn't tend to be particularly visually stunning, they almost always did a good job by being faithful to the manga they adapted, which is something I really appreciated. And they tended to do a lot of series that were like your non-traditional shonen. For example, I thought they did a great job with Akatsuki no Yona.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the manga is even better. But that being said, considering that it only covered less than half the story, I thought the anime did, frankly, a really, really good job. And I thought that it looked really good too, actually. I thought visually it was a very solid series. People who follow me know I love Yona. I think that's in my top 10 manga of all time. I think it's absolutely a fantastic historical fantasy.
And they also did Baby Steps, which I know was another one.
Yeah, well, you know what? Baby Steps got two 25 episode seasons, so I can't complain. To me, it's the best pure sports manga of all time in terms of a series that's, well, I mean, that's a big statement. I'm a big fan of a lot of sports manga, but I put the Adachi manga in another category, because I think the sports is really the canvas, and it's the human relationships that are the actual work of art there. Whereas Baby Steps, although it has a phenomenal main character and good supporting cast, I think the sports is really the centerpiece of the series. So I can't complain. It got Pierrot, in my view, frankly, did not do a great job with the visuals on that series. You could tell the budget was really crimped, but tennis is not an easy sport to depict on the screen, because it's full of a lot of really intense, high-speed movement, which is hard to do when you're cutting corners. It wasn't a horror show like the first season of Kingdom, but it was definitely not their best work. Whereas I thought with Yona, it was consistently visually, it was very appealing pretty much from beginning to end, I thought. So
before we sign off as well, can I make one prediction?
Absolutely.
This isn't a sequel. This isn't. This will be the first season of this getting adapted. But if I'm to make one prediction in 2022, I think Call of the Night, which is a series coming out in summer, I believe, and it's the same author who did Dagashi Kashi a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I think you're going to like that. I think that might end up quite high on your end of year list. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'll sound silly in retrospect, but that's my prediction.
Really?
For you, yeah.
This is a vampire series?
As far as non-sequels go.
This is a vampire series, right?
It's really quite good.
I like Dagashi Kashi. I mean, I don't think it's anything profound, but I thought the first season, especially of the anime, was very good. I did not even realize it was the same mangaka. I didn't even realize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so you're saying keep an eye on that one, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's my prediction. I
Okay.
could be wrong. I've been wrong in the past. We'll see.
Okay, well, good to know. Yofukashi no Uta is the Japanese title on that. It's actually coming out from Leiden Films, which is the same studio that's going to be doing the Kenshin series, which is kind of interesting. All right, well, thank you for that. That's good to know. So I would like to do this again at some point in the future, but let's. In the meantime, let me just say thank you very much for stopping in to join us. I know we've been in touch, but it's nice to it's nice to reconnect on air, as it were. And I hope you're staying safe. I hope I know in the UK right now it's times are challenging as they have been for most of the last couple of years. And Japan has found the secret. They don't test anybody and pretend everything is fine. If only you guys had figured out that secret, everyone would be okay. But I know. Have you had it, to your knowledge, just out of curiosity?
I think I had it in March 2020, but that was before tests were
Okay.
easy to get. I did lose my sense of taste and smell for about 2 or 3 months, but that was
That's pretty
before it
much
was kind of
that's pretty much a
yeah,
dead giveaway then, because there's not too many other things out there that cause that to happen. Well,
yeah. Though
I all I can
I remember
say,
at the time.
yeah.
No, I was just gonna say at the time I remember it being um, not a symptom that people were talking
Mm.
about until after. So, but
Well,
since then, I think I've been fine, and hopefully you're the same.
and you've been boosted?
I have been boosted. All
Yeah.
good. All ready to
I
go.
have not been boosted because in Japan you can't get boosted yet unless you're a medical professional. Because in Japan, of course, everything is fine because they don't test anyone. But I'm being careful, which is all any of us can do. You all listening, viewing, I hope you're all being careful too. But Samu, it's always great to talk to you. You're welcome on the channel anytime. And I love to talk about anime with you, but I think I love to talk about manga with you even more because you and I are both people that really, really love manga. And it's manga is I think pretty healthy. Which is I'm not sure I would say the same thing about anime from a creative standpoint, but I would say that about manga. I think it's really healthy. And every time I talk about it in detail, I always kind of get a very optimistic feeling. So there's so many wonderful manga out there. There's so many wonderful anime out there too, but there's so many wonderful manga out there waiting to be discovered. I just don't even have time to read all the stuff I would like to read. So it's nice to talk to someone else who shares that love of it. Thank you again. Stay well, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, and you might see me in the comments of your blog as well. Now and then.
Okay, sounds good. And to all of our viewers and listeners out there, as I always say at the end of these things, for God's sake, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and like and comment. I like to respond to comments and all that good stuff. And the most important thing, though, if I could tell you any one thing, it would be this: please, in God's name, stay frosty. Talk to you soon.